Two girls, ages 8 and 10 years old, grew up in a home that was consumed by issues of poverty, domestic violence, abuse, and drugs. The girls often talked to one another about how they wanted to get to a place that wasn't so painful but happier to live in. The girls were loved by their parents, but their parents struggled to provide a safe and nurturing home, as they were adults in a constant state of survival, trying to heal and make it through as adults with their own intense trauma histories. See, when someone experiences trauma and abuse in life, if they don't learn that they may need some help or some tools to build their resilience, they may not have the capacity to parent in healthy and nurturing ways. This left the girls to be each other's parents. And on a summer day, when their stepfather, a troubled and aggressive man, was away from home and their mom was locked in a bathroom battling addiction and self-harm, the younger sister went to her older sister and pleaded that they take their chance to escape. For weeks, they had packed belongings into pillowcases that they hid in their closets in the case that there was ever a chance for them to leave. They abandoned that broken home on scooters, with pillowcases tied to the handlebars. In the heat of that August day, they traveled down one of the busiest roads in Boise for 5 miles, the pillowcases constantly slipping from the handles of the scooters as they tried to get to a friend's house they thought would be a safe haven. They ended up getting hopelessly lost and waited at a convenience store to try and figure out what they were going to do. They didn't know that at this time, people had already started looking for them. At one point, a police officer stopped at the store, and on the way out, he asked us what we were doing there. We were able to get him to dismiss our odd presence, and we continued talking, trying to figure out what we were going to do. We had no other option but to call the parents of the very house we were trying to get to. The father came and he picked us up, and while we begged him not to, he had no choice but to bring us back to our parents. When we arrived, the block of the trailer park we lived in was filled with cops and firefighters and unfamiliar faces. Many people were upset and frustrated with us, but no one ever asked us why we made the decision that we did. Why did we go so far from home? Why did we cry when we were brought back to a place that should have been welcoming? Why were we so scared? What was going on in our family? What did we need? No one asked us these questions. Maybe they didn't have the knowledge to know that they needed to. Maybe they didn't have the language to discuss what would cause two little girls to make this decision. We were neglected by the people that could have helped us that day, and we were reprimanded for our actions to try and find some place that felt safe. We were left to grow up in this concept of a home made up of individuals who are all just trying to survive their traumas. It is hard to share this story with you today, and it's just one story from the perspective of one child from one family. And it's not that uncommon. I am by no means an outlier. We all know those who have had experiences that we could never imagine, and those impact them in ways that we couldn't believe. My day job is centered around helping individuals heal from their trauma through using tools to access their resilience. This is where the science on abuse and trauma comes into play. I encourage you to dive in deep. Watch the TED Talk from Nadine Burke-Harris. Watch the film Paper Tigers or its partner film Resilience to start your journey into understanding adverse childhood experiences, otherwise known as ACEs. ACEs act, along with Resilience Hope, as the backbones to the educational tools I use in both my professional and personal world to inform those around me about the impact of abuse and trauma. There are many things that are traumatic for individuals and communities, like poverty, homelessness, natural disasters, suicide. These things have a real effect on our community. And while these may not be specifically considered ACEs, we do have to recognize that. When we talk about adverse childhood experiences, we are talking about physical, sexual, emotional abuse, physical, emotional neglect, domestic violence, incarceration, divorce, mental illness, and substance abuse going on within a home. Think about this for a moment. The name of someone you know who may have experienced one of these things probably comes to the tip of your tongue. Is it a family member, a friend, or even you? Keep that person in mind as we continue this discussion into understanding how adverse childhood experiences impact all of us. It was heartbreakingly revealed in the discovery of ACEs that there is an impact on both the mental health and the physical health of an individual. Adults with 4 or more of these experiences were 390% more likely to experience chronic pulmonary lung disease and 460% more likely to experience depression. Children and adolescents who had 7 or more ACE experiences were 5,100% more likely to attempt suicide. These are just a few of the statistics, and they are staggering because these abuses and traumas impact the whole of a person, and then that impact has a ripple of effects through that individual's life that stems out into our community. I think back to the kids I went to school with, and I remember seeing that problem kid who everybody knew was in an abusive home. I remember seeing a friend at a sleepover pushed up against a wall and being screamed at the night before we went to take our SATs. I remember being clueless on what to do when a friend disclosed sexual abuse, or when I heard people that I loved talking about suicide. 13% of children experience domestic violence, 20% experience sexual abuse, and 27% experience substance abuse. On a national level, 1 out of 10 children will have 3 or more ACEs. This is very important for us to consider how this impacts our community. We now have the language developing from trauma that can help us shatter this shame and silence around these issues. There are many different types of experiences that are traumatic, and we have to recognize that all people have problems in just being human, and all of our challenges are unique, and that we have to consider how they impact us. The language developing around trauma, though, will allow us to open up a new door, to look at people through a lens of not what's wrong with me or what's wrong with them, but what happened to me, what happened to them. And this door will allow us to build and develop new types of understandings and empathy to those who may be struggling. When we think about the language developing around these issues, we can start to unravel the impacts of many different public health problems. We can understand that trauma is a silent public health epidemic that we all have to start getting involved and shouting about, because professionals will never solve this crisis alone. There's a responsibility for all of us to get involved. We aren't silent when it comes to the crisis of suicide. We aren't silent when it comes to things like homelessness, poverty, or violence. The general community shows that they care about these issues and how it's fracturing the communities we live in. We, as community members, can create friction for a movement that people will care about. And this will allow us to move past the mindset that we can exist without intervention at the root of the problem. Right now, we can disrupt the way trauma is impacting all of us. We can use our language to discuss how trauma can stop passing throughout generations. It's important for us to use these tools and skills because we have to educate ourselves so that we can create more conversation so that our public systems will start utilizing the resources available and hopefully move to preventing these problems in the beginning. Prevention and educational measures are the most successful ways to help a community heal and begin a process of working through these issues, but they are often the most underfunded and overlooked. So here we are now, at the end of a discussion that asks you to take this information and apply it to those in your life. What steps will you take? What can you do? I ask in this next week that you go out and you educate yourself with the plentiful resources available. I ask that you have a conversation with a loved one, with your family, about the needs that you might have, because it's important to address those and understand that they are important because we are not alone in these challenges. I ask that you create a conversation of advocacy and advocate that all of us get more involved in talking about these issues so that we can truly come together and understanding how to help our communities. Do something, big or small, because I want you to think back with me to when my sister and I were brought home back to the place that had been hurting us. What if someone could have sat with us and used this language to ask us why we did what we did that day, What if they could have seen the signs of abuse and trauma that were so evident? What would have been possible if conversations could have happened with my parents before they started their own families about the traumas they experienced? What if they could have been allowed to access their resilience? Everybody has undeniable potential and worth. There are so many solutions that we can take to look and solve these crises that are unfolding in front of us and impacting every one of us. We have the capacity to disrupt the silent epidemic of trauma. Educating ourselves with this information and creating conversations will allow us to better understand where we are at now so we can have a better and brighter future where we are headed.